We scaled Systemize to scale from 0 to 6 figures in just 7 weeks. And if I was to do it again, these are the exact automations that I would use. My name is George O'Farrell and I dropped out of school when I was 17 years old to start my first business. That business then went on to earn me my first £100,000 when I was 19. And since then, I've launched 2 more businesses, one of which is Systemize to Scale, which we have now worked with over 450 different businesses, helping them scale through systems and automations. The goal of this video is to give you all of the mistakes that I've made so that you can skip past my failures and start making success even quicker. The problem I see is too many business owners rush into launching their business too quickly. They think the process will be easy and they'll have a queue of customers lining up ready to buy their product. But unfortunately, the sad reality is that 60 to 90%, if not more, of new businesses fail within their first year. And I'm going to be honest with you, running a business is not easy. You're going to doubt yourself, you're going to question your decisions, and you're going to question why you got into this game to start with. But in between all these doubts and stressful events, you're going to see moments of success. These moments are what make it all completely worth it. And if you follow these steps and implement these systems, you're going to see a lot more successful events over mistakes and stressful scenarios. Most business owners start a business based off delivering a product or service that they are incredibly good at themselves. This means that they can launch a business and get speed to market without having to hire lots of staff to deliver that product or service, which initially is a great thing. It means that your product can be delivered quicker, you can be in control of the moving parts, and you can keep a huge amount of profit at the end of the day. This extra cash flow means you can then hire and build systems and automations quicker to keep up with your growth. But the problem is a lot of business owners don't use this cash flow. They keep this cash flow and save this cash flow, which means they then get too caught up in delivering the product that they hit a complete bottleneck. This is essentially where systems and automations come into play to allow you to keep on scaling whilst delivering an incredibly high value service to your clients. When you first launch a business, you probably don't have a huge amount of lead flow. The lead flow that you do have needs to be nurtured and you cannot afford to miss out on these leads. So if I was to launch my business again, the main focus for automations and systems would be regarding my sales process. And these are the key systems that I would implement inside my sales process to allow me to continue scaling.
Systemize to Scale is our all-in-one sales and marketing platform that we've created to allow us and the businesses that we work with to essentially streamline their business and scale through automations and systems through one all-in-one sales and marketing platform at a far cheaper cost than all these other subscriptions. So the first thing that I would look at setting up is automated keyword triggers so we can take social media audiences, turn them into leads and continue to nurture them. The problem a lot of businesses face is they build up a social media presence, but they have not turned these leads into essentially data that they can nurture. So when we come into automation, we want to create a few key automations. So we're going to create a workflow. And essentially inside this workflow, we want to think about creating some high value assets. So for example, if you are a fitness coach, a high value asset could be a calorie calculator. It depends what type of demographic that you are working in as to what valuable asset you can give them in return for getting their email address. So what we're going to do is we're essentially going to build out that flow here together. So as a trigger, what we want to do is we want to essentially have people DMing us certain words and then also people commenting certain words. What this means is we can put up a post and as a call to action, we can get people to comment. This will then get people to comment and we'll automatically DM them. And then in return for giving them the free resource, they're going to give us their email. We'll only give them the free resource. Once we have their email, we can then remarket to those people. Then what we can do is we can post that post on our story. So we can just share it on our story and get people to comment, get people to reply to that. And that will then trigger off the DM. So what we want to do as a trigger, we can then in our platform choose customer replied and we can click here. What we can then do is we can put a filter in and we can then essentially select what channel it comes from. So do we essentially want this to be a trigger word on Instagram, on Facebook, on SMS, on WhatsApp? Where do we want this to be a trigger word? Let's say Instagram. What we can do is we can add another filter and then we can choose exact match phrase. Generally, you want to go for exact match phrase rather than contains, because contains means that someone could message us a sentence and it could just have the word in that we want to trigger, then it triggers off. it creates more confusion than is needed. So exact match phrase. So let's say, for example, this is a free resource giving people their calories. So we can then essentially call this calories. What I would then do is I'd add in a couple of different variations. So calories, calorie. It's not case sensitive, so it's fine regardless of the capitals and non-capitals, but it is obviously exact match phrase. So if people message us calories or if people message us calorie, we can save that. What we then also want to do is we want to add another trigger, which is essentially, commenting. So essentially people commenting on a post. This is just a test account, but you'll then essentially be able to select one of these. So if people comment on Instagram or if people comment on Facebook. What we can then do is we can save this. And if we were using the comment one, we would then obviously want to reply to the comment. So here we can reply to the comment. I just don't have a Facebook or Instagram account connected to the platform. If I did, I can simply just select one of those. And then what this means is we can then essentially have someone comment on a post. It picks up the comment, it replies to their comment, and then it sends them a DM. It's an incredibly valuable tool of taking a piece of social media content that has engagement, has traffic, turning that traffic into extra engagement that then creates more traffic because it pushes the social media algorithm, and then it takes that traffic into a DM conversation where we can nurture them. And the thing with this is it's automatic, so it's speed. A big thing with taking leads into sales is we need speed. So this has speed with it because it automatically replies to them. Then it ensures that we gather their email address in return for giving them the free resource. So then the email address goes into the platform, and then we can have a nurture sequence to continue to nurture them. If they've just sent us a DM, we then just want to send them essentially a message back, Instagram DM. What we can then do here is we can write out the message. There's a few things to think about. We can use custom fields to then address things to people's first names, which works really well. The only thing to be aware of with this is not everyone puts their first name down on Instagram. If we're, say, sending out an email or sending out a WhatsApp or a text, it works amazingly. But if we're sending out an Instagram or a Facebook message, we just have to be aware that not every profile puts first name, so that can get mixed up. So generally I wouldn't put that in. We can then write out our wording here, and this essentially is a specific wording. So we could go, hey, thanks so much for reaching out. And then you'd go into essentially the wording around what it is the resource that you're going to give them. And then after you've added in the wording, you then essentially want to put in a call to action is, what is the best email address to send the resource across to? Then what we want to do is we then essentially want to wait for 2 hours. We then essentially want to wait until the contact replies. So we want to wait until they reply to that message, or 2 hours if they haven't replied. So then what we want to do is we then essentially want to go, right, so the system triggers when they send us a message. It then automatically sends them back a reply. It waits until they reply to us. And then if they haven't replied to us, it then follows up with them. And you can see here, what we've got now is this will happen after 2 hours. So if they haven't replied, or this will happen when a contact replies. So when the contact replies, what we then want to do is we want to then check, and we want to check if they sent their email. Then what we want to do is we want to then essentially click on contact details, we want to go down to email, and we want to then check is not empty. So inside our platform, the cool part of this is anytime someone messages their email or phone number on Instagram or Facebook or WhatsApp, it will automatically take that and save it onto their profile in the system. The system will then pick that up and know that that field is no longer empty, so we know that we've got an email valid. If the email is not empty, it means that we have essentially got their email now. What we can then do is we can then send them back the resource, so we can then add the wording and share that actual physical resource with them. But if they then don't have the email valid, we want to send a follow-up, and we want to then essentially add the wording saying that email doesn't look like that email is valid. Could you just please add the email again and just make sure it's the right one? Then what we want to do is we then essentially want to check again to see if that email is valid again. So we can then do another if statement, and we can then check, have they sent their email? First we just want to put a wait step in. So we then just want to wait until they reply, and we then want to essentially wait for 2 hours again if they haven't replied. So they have replied, well again, let's then now check, have they sent their email? Have they sent email? Contact details, down to email, and email is not empty. Cool. So if they have sent their email, then what we can do is we can then essentially put in the message to add the wording to essentially give them the free resource. If they haven't sent their email, I would just let the workflow stop, and that's where we'd have one setter jump into that conversation and handle that to essentially realize what is going wrong here. Why are they not sending an email? Let's then have a setter move that conversation across. What we can do is if we work back up to the top, so essentially when they reply, it checks here. If they haven't replied, what we then want to do is we then essentially want to put an if statement, and we want to choose no reply. So what we can then do is we can go contact replied, and we can go contact replied, and we can then essentially select false, which means that they haven't replied. So they haven't replied. We can then add another Instagram message, and we can add the wording, and this would be the follow-up. So we'll be like, hey, you reached out 2 hours ago, just haven't seen your message, just checking you haven't missed this and bumping this one up for you. What's the best email to share across the resource with? And then we'll put the call to action. What email is best to share across the resource for whatever it is the outcome that resource achieves. Then what we want to do is when they then come back to us, we then want to essentially wait again. So we can then scroll down and wait until they reply. And then we can then wait for 2 hours if they haven't replied. So then what happens here is if they reply, well, we want to then check for their email, if their email is valid, right? So instead of us just building out this whole workflow again, what we can do is we can just use a go-to step to essentially link in to this part of the automation. So then what this does, it then comes to here, checks if their email is valid, and then goes through the steps that we did before. Now, what we can then do here is if they haven't replied to this follow-up, we can then essentially add in another if statement, and we can go no reply. And what we can then do, contact replied false, and then we can build out another follow-up. So we can put another Instagram message as one last nudge. Generally something like this that works really well is, hey, I've got the link ready for you. I'm just not quite sure where to send it. Just let me know when's a better time to get in touch. And I can get that resource across to you to make sure that you achieve whatever the outcome is. And then we'd finish the workflow there. So we'd add the wording in for that one. So if we get Instagram message, we'd add the wording in, and then a setter would continue the conversation when they reply back. Cool. Then what we want to do is these two messages are where we give them the free resource. What we then want to do is we want to wait for their reply, or if they haven't come back to us in essentially 12 hours. Now the thing to realize with Facebook and Instagram is there's a thing called a 24-hour rule. Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, anything by Meta. We can only automate messages. They only allow us to automate messages if that lead has engaged within 24 hours. So if I message you, you can automate messages to me across a 24-hour period. If it exits that 24-hour period and I haven't sent you a message, or you haven't sent me a message, that 24 hours resets, and that then needs to have a manual message to start it again. So the reason we wait for 12 hours is we're then essentially prolonging that 24-hour period again. Then if we wait another 12 hours, we mesh again, then we got another 24 hours. So it keeps that conversation flowing. So if they, down here, we're then essentially going, have they replied or not? If they haven't replied, cool. If they have replied, then a setter's going to handle that conversation. If they haven't replied, we want to just make sure they haven't replied. So we can then go no reply, and then contact reply, false. If they haven't replied, we can then essentially send an Instagram message just checking in to see how they found that resource. So just checking in, hey, just checking in to see how you found the resource. I'm sure you'd agree it's amazing for helping you achieve X, Y, and Z. It's then starting that conversation again. We have to realize that we've got their emails, they're in our email sequence, and then we also can now use that conversation as conversation starter for a setter to continue that conversation and then book them in for a call or make a sale. Now, what we want to do here is we simply want to take here and use a go-to step again to just connect this, because we deliver the resource here, we deliver the resource here. So essentially it's a very similar process, right? So what we can do is we can just connect this up to the workflow. An easier option actually would just be to essentially remove that message and then just connect it up to that message, and then the flow continues on. And that's then essentially, we'll turn it on with save it and name it. And then essentially what this is an automated sequence you can use to collect emails from leads who comment on posts, who DM you certain messages, and then you can turn those into leads in a nurture sequence that you can then continue to follow up with. Now, if we save this, we can continue building out a nurture sequence. And what we can now do is we can then essentially take all of those leads every time a lead comes in, and we can then follow up with them even more. So what we want to do is we then want to add a trigger, which is when there's a contact. And we then essentially want to go when there's a contact created, and then when that contact created has a valid email. There's two things that we can think about. Either we can go contact created or we can go contact changed. Contact created is essentially when it creates a new contact. What you have to realize is any contact that comes from Instagram, comes from Facebook, comes from WhatsApp will automatically be in the platform as soon as they message you. That being said, they then won't have an email at that point. So what we can do is we can do contact changed. And down here, you can select lots of different filters like tags, assigned user, DND, all of these things. But what we want to think about is we want to tag them. And essentially this is then only going to trigger this automation when a certain tag is added to someone. We can create a tag here, so email valid, for example. This then means that this automation is only going to change when only going to trigger when the email valid tag is added to someone. So what we can then do is we can go back to the automation before, and we can go to recents and we can open up the one that we were just editing. And then what we can see is we obviously set it up to make sure that we collect someone's email. And this is the message we send to them after we've got their email. So we can just add the tag to them, and that tag we can add to them is email valid here. When we add this tag, that will then trigger the other automation. That other automation was the one that we were in a second ago. And if we go back to that, we can then essentially keep on building that automation out. Now inside this automation, what we can then do is we can then essentially wait, and we can wait for 1 day, and we can then deliver an email. And we can then essentially send an email. We can put in your sending name, sending email subject line, and then the whole email copy. And in the email copy, we can then choose custom values, and we can then essentially use first name. Like I mentioned though, those leads are coming from Instagram. They might not have their first name valid on Instagram. So any contact that's in the system obviously will have their name on file, but we just have to realize that some leads from Instagram might not put their name specifically down. Obviously leads that book calls, enter forms, and all these things, they submit their email and name and phone number on the form, but Instagram leads might not have a name on their account, so you just have to be aware of that. So maybe you don't use the first name on the emails, but you build out your email copy. Then what you can keep doing is you can add more wait steps, and you can then wait again for another day, and then you can add another email section in, and you can keep on building out your email sequence. And then you're building out an email sequence, driving people through into essentially then booking in a call, which is the outcome that you want, which then allows you to close the prospect and pitch the prospect and sell them into your products. A lot of businesses don't then focus on this aspect of a sales pipeline. They'll focus on the later stages. They'll focus on building the automations for applications that come through, for calls that gets booked, for all these different outcomes, and having a clear pipeline, which is incredibly important. And you'll see that I've run through this in other videos. But if you're a new business and you don't have systems in place like this, you're going to struggle to take social media leads into sales. Now, with this process, what you then want to do is you want to focus on posting content that creates a huge amount of traffic, and that traffic can then flow into these systems and get nurtured even more and come through to essentially being sales. This will allow you to pivot all your time into running ads, into creating content, into essentially creating traffic on the front end that grows your personal brand, your business brand, your traffic. This takes that traffic and puts it into your sales pipeline. A big problem that we see with numerous different businesses that we work with is they have a sales pipeline, but they don't have any traffic going into it. They don't have people inquiring, they don't have people booking in calls, and they definitely don't have it consistently until they have systems like this that do it on autopilot for them. So having this system in place will allow you to really focus on the main things right now, which is creating content, creating traffic, and pushing people into these systems.